a singular concept called Musea della Bête, right?
Okay.
Which means the Museum of the Beast. And it really was about questioning what the museum is doing. How does the museum enact this beastliness that it thinks it contains?
I see.
So the notion of museum is really about cabinets of curiosities. It's like collecting things that are of interest, that are grotesque, that are strange, that are
Mm,
out of the ordinary, and
mm,
and preserving it in a way for people to be able to learn from them. Yes, there's a scientific reason. There's the epistemological reason,
mm,
learning from it. Then there is, of course, the entertainment reason, and a number of other social kind
mm,
of functions that the museum has. But
mm.
as a concept and construct itself, it's usually problematic because it has these colonial roots of spoils, like collecting spoils and housing it in a place. Often we were spoils, right? Our
Mm.
bodies were part of those spoils. And there's always this kind of very Western view of what is civilized that is still being imposed, right? So it's very, very
Mm.
interesting when you watch that. And of course, this Musée de la Bête is based um, on both the story
Mm.
of Sarah Baartman, but also on the modern day freak show. And how as human beings have we created such a normative response to it? How do we not question this anymore?
Museums are not neutral spaces, but sites where power, memory, and knowledge are actively produced. This episode reframes curatorial practice as research, not representation, examining how materiality, fragmented memory, and disrupted time challenge colonial narratives and linear history. We interrogate museums as political institutions, question why practice-based research still struggles for academic legitimacy, and push decoloniality beyond surface inclusion. At stake is a deeper question: who gets to author memory and shape belonging and decide what the future inherits? My guest is Dr. Fareda Nazir. Dr. Fareda Nazir is a curator, artist, and senior lecturer at the University of Johannesburg in South Africa, whose work interrogates memory, power, and decolonial knowledge production. Her practice-based research challenges colonial museological narratives, treating curatorship as a rigorous method of inquiry rather than mere representation. Through measured institutional intervention and scholarly work, she repositions museums as a contested political space where history, identity, belonging are actively shaped rather than neutrally preserved. Dr. Nazir, welcome to the Solomon Atah podcast.
Thank you, Solomon. It's really lovely to be here.
Perhaps we want to start from past, present, future. Understand that this was a baby of yours, a body of work of yours about 6 or so years ago.
Yeah, so the exhibition and broader project titled Post Present Future was an idea that I had, and it was growing over a certain period, like 3 years of kind of culmination in 2019 as an exhibition, but also a much more expansive project of trying to address issues, what I thought was issues in museum spaces. So
Okay.
in particular, museums that depict troubling histories, political histories, within the kind of South African and broader African context. So in this instance, I responded to my prior experiences with the Apartheid Museum, where I had done various community projects and youth projects, and felt that the youth sector,
Yeah.
and I'm only speaking, of course, of a limited number of people who I
Yeah.
had contact with, between the ages of about 15 and 20, were underexposed to history. And then I later found that there was, in fact, a huge gap in history education within South Africa. It's like there was a void around contemporary histories, especially histories of apartheid.
Yeah.
And that the museums were one of these places that was disseminating and educating predominantly international publics, but also schools and local publics in the vicinity. What I did find about the space was that it claimed to address and claimed to act as a way to heal South Africans or to heal the nation of a very, very difficult and violent past, right? However, it seemed to me, after working for many years on these various community-based youth projects, that firstly, the way that the space was curated didn't necessarily allow for much dialogue and allow for access of locals or South Africans, for that matter, to be able to really go into deep places, to make it a space that had some element of hope in it, versus addressing a past that could be potentially quite triggering. I think that there's a lot of different aspects, of course, that I studied and kind of researched about the space, as well as the audience's engagement with the space and the exhibitions there, in the process of creating artworks and curating a show in situ within the museum itself, not in a gallery space, but within the museum. So that is how the Post-Present Future exhibition came about.
Your research critiques starting museological narratives inherited from colonial epistemologies. How can curatorial practice function as a legitimate mode of knowledge production rather than merely a site of representation?
I think the curatorial project is really, and this is my definition, this is not the textbook definition, but I see it as an opportunity again to facilitate growth, development, transformation. And it's such a powerful platform and position to be in order to create spaces, to create platforms where people come together and is able to dialogue around pertinent issues.
Okay.
Right? Of course, histories is part of that, and of course, futures is part of that. So it's really about looking at something in its holistic, in its most holistic way. So whenever I curate a show, I really think about what is it that people can take home? How can I shift people's minds and how can I facilitate new understandings and insights on matters at hand, or the topics that we're addressing through this curated exhibition or this curated body of work or objects and so forth. So I approach it from the point of view as a teacher, right? Or as a pedagogue, making kind of sure that there's always a moment where people can sit and reflect, a moment where people can dialogue and debate, where they can be critical about who they are, where they are, and how they fit in the world. And I think that's essentially a value system as a pedagogue, as a teacher, and a philosophy that I have about kind of how I do service in the world. And I think that that is tied so tightly in what I do, which is why I've always had 5 jobs. It's like, because all of those 5 jobs is really all it's doing is really kind of missioning towards a central goal of social justice, of transformation, and so forth.
So much of your work engages with memory as something fragmented, residual, and embodied. How does materiality operate in your practice as a methodological tool for engaging historical trauma and cultural trace?
So I think as another principle of how I make work and how I facilitate engagement using material objects, using the body, using the space, right, is to think through what are the things that are familiar, right? Really basing it on how we can situate the audience or the interlocutor. How can we create a space where there's a memory that is triggered? So, and I use the word triggered again, but in a different way. There's a memory prompted or kind of evoked in a way through an object, through a material, through something that is familiar in some way or the other. So for instance, if we use a certain textile that is familiar to us, I think that I often base work on my own memory, but that memory is positioned within a context also, remember. So I remember in my home as I grew up, we used to have this beautiful Persian carpet. And of course, it wasn't a real Persian carpet. It was a faux Persian carpet, right? Because real Persian carpets is really, really expensive. But it was the same pattern as a Persian carpet. And my father was very, very, very proud, and my mother was very proud of this carpet, and we always would clean it, etc. Other objects are brass objects. It's like we were obsessed with brass, and then I always had to clean, and my sister had to clean the brass with Brasso and, you know. And these things has a certain, because we are physically kind of engaged with this object in our homes, we grow up with them. There's things like, what are they called? Ornaments, we call them. So it's like the little dog, the little ceramic dog. Or the ducks on the wall. You see, it's all, this is all in our cultural memory, right? So, so there's definitely an alignment to the collective. And when my memory aligns to a collective memory, that's like a gold mine of objects that can prompt an emotive response. And for me, that is the best way to kind of get people engaged into works. When there's an emotive or a visceral response, like, this looks familiar, but I don't know why. It makes people curious, right? When you position that in an exhibition or an installation or a performance in a way that slightly subverts your original understanding of the object, that is a moment or opportunity to learn. I use the word opportunity a lot because I think that art and art-based work is so filled with opportunity to understand things differently. It's so filled with opportunity to give you different perspectives. It's so filled with opportunity to evoke an emotive response, and then to move on from there, to get people to engage in a way, to get angry, to get sad, to get happy, to be able to celebrate. And then how do we move forward with that? And that's where the dialogue comes in.
Yes, because I have a question. Sorry, Dr. Nazir, to break it. I have a question that I wanted to ask so quickly about what kind of dialogues emerge when you've done an installation. What kind of dialogues do you see really emerging from perhaps audiences or participants or from the installation itself? What kind of dialogues prompt, given that context in which the installation has taken place?
So, so I can speak definitely from a perspective of my own practice as an artist. And I can speak from the perspective of, so curating and kind of creating my own artworks and then curating other artists, right? So let's speak from the easiest, which is really my own practice. So I recently had an exhibition that was related. I had a number of exhibitions from a singular concept called Musea de la Bête, right? which means the Museum of the Beast. And it really was about questioning what the museum is doing. How does the museum enact this beastliness that it thinks it contains?
I see.
So the notion of museum is really about cabinets of curiosities. It's like collecting things that are of interest, that are grotesque, that are strange, that are out of the ordinary, and preserving it in a way for people to be able to learn from them. Yes, there's a scientific reason. There's the epistemological reason, learning from it. Then there is, of course, the entertainment reason, and a number of other social kind of functions that the museum has. But as a concept and construct itself, it's usually problematic because it has these colonial roots of spoils, like collecting spoils and housing it in a place. Often we were spoils, right? Our bodies were part of those spoils. And a very infamous story is the story of a Khoikhoi woman called Sarah Bartman, and I'm sure you're familiar
Yes,
with
I'm familiar
this.
with that, with her. Yeah, yeah. Was
So
exhibited in
talking,
France.
so related to that, this Musée de la Bête was based on the story of Sarah Bartman, but it was then really, so it was inspired, and then kind of parts of it was based on actual historical events, and the majority of it was really about how do we reframe the story as a story of now, and what are the continuities from the time of the freak show? What are the continuities from the time of the museum proper, if we want to call it that, or the old museology? And how as human beings have we created such a normative response to it? How do we not question this anymore?
Yeah.
Right? How is it okay?
Especially
Because,
when our
as we
bodies
know,
are part of that
absolutely,
archive, if you like.
absolutely. There's also newer archival methods. There's social media. And this is one of the most interesting forms of archiving, because essentially we choose to place ourselves on these
That
archives,
archive.
and they remain there after we die, right? So it freezes us in these different periods of our lives in different ways that
Thought
we
about it like
want to
that.
position ourselves.
It's very eye-opening. Oh my
So
gosh.
so
Okay.
so so there's also reality TV, which is an interesting current format for a freak show. I don't know if you know that TLC, which is the Learning Channel. That's what it stands for, the Learning Channel.
Yes.
And TLC is a very well-known reality TV channel.
Yeah.
And I found myself using it for research, actually, for this project of Musée de la Bête.
Okay.
Because if you go into reading up about how reality TV came about, is that it was really kind of using the trope of freak show to get people hooked. It's exactly the trope of freak show. Right?
Wow.
And TLC says so explicitly in one of the interviews, in the earlier interviews. It's like, we're creating a freak show. So of course, now when you look at the type of programming and the type of shows that they have, it
is evident then. It is evident that it is a modern day freak show.
They achieved what they set out to do, right? So I found when I did some research on it, there's articles that uses the word freak show. So at the end of the day, if we look at, so I did of course I was watching because I was like, oh, this is interesting, falling for the trap, but with a very critical mind as well. It's like, what is being done here and why am I interested? So I'm interested because I want to see the strange and interesting. What does strange and interesting mean in this context? So they show people with bodies of a particular type. So there's people who are short, right? There are people who have dwarfism, for instance. There's people who have bigger bodies. So people with obesity, right? And they tell the stories of people with obesity.
The struggles, etc., and they kind of extract that for
psychological issues. So there's people with hoarding disabilities or conditions. And they're framed in different ways, right? There's also the gypsy, my big fat gypsy wedding, others, right? There's 90 days to wed, always wedding with people from another place. And then there's 90 days to wed the other way, which is now we get to see where these people are from, right? So it's a process of othering, and it's definitely that object of the gaze, right? So how do these people or those people live? And there's always this kind of very Western view of what is civilized that is still being imposed, right? So it's very, very interesting when you watch that. And of course, this Musée de la Bête is based on both the story of Sarah Baartman, but also on the modern day freak show. And through that exhibition, I created a performance piece, and then subsequent a museum of bodily, kind of objects. So body parts made out of textile that is displayed in the museum. The engagement around that was very, very interesting. I think people, one in particular was on a walkabout with a group of women who found it extremely violent.
Okay.
And I wish I could show you some images so that you could see. But maybe I can share some with you after, and you can slot them in, or you can put a link.
Okay.
It was a very, from my own opinion, it was very beautifully made objects. Nothing was kind of explicit in any way.
Yeah.
But the violence was in the curating of the objects.
I see.
All separate, some in jars. And that image, through subtle cues, evokes the idea of the bodies that are collected in spaces like museums. And there's the narrative in the format of now, which was a performance, right? That was recorded, and we turned it into a documentary, and I was doing a voiceover speaking as if I was David Attenborough. So that was playing, and then there was all of these textile body parts positioned quite beautifully, placed, but there was something quite violent about the sparseness of how the body wasn't together anymore.
The dismembering of it, in a way, stroke, and perhaps did you intend it to evoke how the Black body has been dismembered, albeit it's still together?
So that speaks to also a fragmentation. It speaks to some of the work by M. Césaire, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but about the double consciousness, about the brokenness. I think more than double consciousness, there's double conscious, and there's the fractured consciousness of losing parts of yourself. Besides for me and you, there's me and the land. There's also me and my community. All of those things were broken. They were intentionally broken to break.
So it's a choreographed fragmentation. It was very carefully choreographed.
It was intentional. It was intentional.
Practice-led research, if I may, practice-led research is in the arts still struggles for epistemic legitimacy within the academy. What methodological frameworks have you found most effective in articulating artistic practice as a rigorous research rather than an illustrative output?
So I think for me, I interpret that question in two ways. So I agree, yes, there's still a continued struggle for legitimacy amongst other disciplines, although very interestingly, we really, as artists, are engaged very deeply in all disciplines. So an artist will always have a very close link to the humanities and social sciences because we work with people, and or with natural sciences, engineering, mathematics, you know, all of the STEM and the STEAM are combined when it comes to artists because your content, so you have a skill to articulate through visuals, but your content, what you're talking about, is derived from every other discipline that you can imagine. So,
Yes.
so there's always this kind of multimodality that occurs. So I think that when it comes to legitimacy, yes, there's a struggle for it. In South Africa at the moment, there's been a process since about 2017 of accrediting creative research. I think I mentioned it before during this talk, and it's been a difficult process. I think that this idea of rigor and scholarship is an interesting and important one.
Yeah.
And I don't actually think that we have to prove ourselves too much because all of that is there already. I do think there is the danger, though, of shrinking projects or research that has a much more profundity.
Yeah.
That you know, and trying to categorize what you're doing
into a particular framework that must fit the academic
trying to articulate
paradigm
what you're doing to
for legitimacy.
Absolutely.
So, Doc, if I may here, because this is something that I find quite interesting, and I think the audience would too, is that you are saying that for an artist, a practicing artist, to shrink everything that they know or various forms of epistemologies so that they can now come and fit into these paradigms and frameworks and methodologies so that it can now be legitimized. But whose framework is that, if I may?
So the arts borrow their framework from social sciences, from humanities, right? And I think that it's the closest, you know, but I also feel that it's important that we begin to think about how the arts doesn't have to fit under the humanities and that it's a thing of its own because it really fits quite easily into a lot of different domains, and that the methodology of practice-based research or practice-led research should be as fluid as the practice itself.
Correct.
So there needs to be like a mixed research methodology that is part of that practice that is acknowledged, and then there should be ample space provided for each of those methodologies to be able to really interrogate over longer periods of time what happened during that research process. Because I feel that what happens is you only ever have the opportunity to submit your research once. So a project you submit once, and then you're able to look at a particular stream within that project, right? Where there's multiple streams.
Yes.
There's the process that you can articulate. There is the actual outputs or the artworks that you can articulate. And then there's the aftermath of that can be
the exhibition thereof, etc., and the public performances thereof afterwards.
So there's a multitude of methodological and method-based
Yeah.
kind of spaces that we can draw on, we can mine from in order to make sense of that, in order to reflect on. But like I said, there's a danger of it being shrunken down, yeah, because of perhaps a lack of understanding of how these processes actually work and how much an embodied understanding can bring, you know, to a
Yes.
field.
Museums are often framed as neutral public institutions. From your curatorial interventions, how should we understand museums as political sites that actively shape social memory, identity, and belonging?
I think if you approach life, and I think I mentioned a little bit about the construct of museum and where it
Yes.
came from now. Then I'm going to jump to if you approach life as a socio-political soup, then I think it is very hard to sever the politicization or the core political premise of museum and cultural institutions. So my understanding of education in any context is that it's political. Museums in some way has that epistemological or educational aspect to it. But besides for that, I think the majority of it really sits around the educational aspect. So how do you kind of begin to unpack what kind of impact such a space has as a cultural, educational institution, right? Because museums are essentially curated by human beings
Yes.
who have ideological ideas about the world.
And bias.
And so that, but it also has funders.
Yes. Oh.
So there's these various threads that feed into how a museum comes about. Who's the audience? Who are the buyers? If there's buyers, if it's a museum of that sort, who are the funders? What is it that we're trying to say with this museum? What is the message? What is the meta narrative? And then how do we operationalize and represent what we would like to present? So, of course, like I said, each of these groups of people come with their ideological stance and an agenda. And it's impossible for museums to be apolitical for that reason.
No.
Yeah. So we are driving a message.
Even if they tried, it's almost like by its nature, it is very contested and very political, with various differing systems that influence its operations and its existence,
Absolutely.
so to speak.
So it's born out of, like I said, the soup of politics. That's how it is. That's how it comes about. And it's almost impossible for there to be like a non-political position or an apolitical position. And needless to say that within that, there's quite liberal museums. There's museums that are community museums that has manifestos that is really about people and how people can produce change and how people can live better and how to humanize people who were previously dehumanized, et cetera, right? So those kind of social museums, they offer a very interesting space to counter museum, to counter the regular museum strict structure of we show objects, we preserve them, we you know, we're doing so. We have objects in this space, or we have no objects in the space, but we're still a museum. You know, starting to really think through. So there's a field called the new museology, which started about 20, 30, 40 years ago. It's new. And now there's even another iteration of that called the anti-museum.
Okay.
That still includes the notion. So for something to be anti, it has to include, right?
What
So
is this anti? Yeah.
anti-colonialism, you have to focus on colonialism, but the opposite of it, or the antithesis of that.
Yes.
Now with anti-museum, there's still museum, but it's about how do we disrupt or unravel or kind of push against the notion of museum, meaning perhaps memorializing and doing memory work in a way that is more localized, linked to indigenous and disenfranchised knowledges. And how do we work with the people of this place within that space, and so forth. So there's some very beautiful museum spaces as well. One of them is where I actually have a show at the moment. It's called the A42 House.
Yeah.
And it's got a very, very interesting vision and mission. So if you Google it, you'll be able to find it. And basically it's a community museum, and one of the first to have what do you call those? Like a land acknowledgement as you enter.
Okay.
So I think the first in Johannesburg.
Yeah, because I was going to ask
possibly
you to
even
just
in South
give us
Africa.
some examples of what a social museum is and looks like, and what that anti-museum also looks like. Yeah, because that would actually just help bring the message home.
So yes, it's this A42 house, which there's a place, there's it's on a particular site.
Yeah.
And it has recently launched on the 15th of January. As part of a bigger project by Nauri Blankenberg, called the Institute for Creative Repair.
Okay, that's interesting.
And this is the physical manifestation of that institute. And there's really lovely activations in the space. There's a healing garden, there's a healing space, there's a space where there's water and one can do particular interventions around the water. There's ways to do residencies in that space, and actually use it as a space where one can think through and work with others through particular issues and concepts and so forth, and how to make meaning of the context that we're in. So it really is conducive about building. It's a very future-focused museum. But of course, as a museum, it acknowledges the past of the particular site, of the peoples, and of the various kind of prompts that it used. So this particular exhibition that it started with is called Grounded.
I see.
And it speaks to the notion of home and what that means. So be it linked to the land, be it linked to what comes from the land, actual household artifacts that evoke a feeling of homeliness and feeling at home and so forth. And it really starts to kind of very gently interrogate that in various ways. And then there's other anti-museums, like I think it's called the Maramusa Project.
Okay.
Rifilwe Nkomo. And she is a curator. The museum doesn't have a space per se. Museums don't have to have spaces. And that's one of the things with traditional museums, is that there's always a space, there's always, you know, the cabinets and, you know, so how do we counter that by becoming the museum ourselves?
Okay, it's interesting.
How do we think through how women function within those spaces? So it takes a Afro-womanist approach,
I see,
to memory and memorializing, and looks at the things that are not usually placed in museums,
Okay.
or not usually honored. So I think that's also a really incredible project to look out for. Yeah, I think
Let's
that's
go
what
to
I can remember at the
go
moment.
to talk about decoloniality beyond representation. Decolonial discourse in art institution is frequently reduced to representational inclusion. What structural or epistemic transformation are required for decoloniality to move beyond surface level diversity towards genuine institutional change?
Wow, you ask hard questions. Important,
When I
important,
have an
hard questions.
academic, I just try to ask them questions. Because when I formulated this question, it was quite, because I was having a chat with someone, if I may, Dr. Nazir, and about the graduation gown, all the very, it seems to me like almost like a bastion of coloniality in a form. And so each time when he wants to talk about decolonization, I said to him, please decolonize the graduation gown. Why can't I just rock up with an African or whatever wear shirt? So
I agree.
decolonial discourse in art institution is frequently reduced to representational inclusions. What structural or epistemic transformations are required for decoloniality to move beyond surface level diversity towards genuine institutional change?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question. It's also a very big question. I think that it's really lovely for me to also be able to reflect on being an institution for such a long time, because of course there's really entrenched structures in place, and in every department that I've worked in a leadership position, the very first thing I would do is start to think about structurally, how do we shift things so that the end user, let's call them the end user, the students,
Yes.
can function at their utmost best
Yeah.
within that context, right? And in the context of the gallery that I work in now, the FADA gallery, the very first thing that I was looking at was staffing.
Okay.
Is really who am I working with within the space, and how do I work with them within the space? And of course, all of these things are budget dependent, but the idea was to grow timber, and to make sure that whoever enters the space and works with me is fully invested, has a deep interest and love for curatorial practice and art practice. And then we sustain that and we feed that and we grow that through a mentorship. There's no mentorship program, but just through mentorship, through me mentoring the people who I work with and making sure that they are okay. I think what's very important really with organizations and that we miss as big institutions is that it can become quite a sausage machine where people become widgets, you know, we just all, and we're going and we like
Yeah.
tick, 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 tick. And how are we as academics, as teachers,
Yeah.
as workers within the space, creating a space of learning, of passion, of moving forward, a place that is supposed to be really honing and kind of acculturing individuals to
Yeah.
become the new adults in the world, you know, the new providers, the new developers, the new creators. If we cannot create a space that thinks of people as humans, that think of them as social beings, that think of them as people who needs to be nurtured in a lot of different ways. And I think that for me, if that gets lost in an institution like this, in an educational institution like a gallery or a museum, then the project becomes something else. Then it becomes what you've just said in terms of this is how we do diversity, right?
Just a presentation on a surface level.
So I can appoint as many Black women as I want, but if I'm not there to make sure that they are getting from it what they need to get, and that there's the mutualism that needs to happen. Like you're doing the work, you're creating the space with me. If we cannot do that together and you're learning, and when you leave here, you can do the same somewhere else. Then I haven't fulfilled the brief of decolonial practice, because one needs to kind of grow that within someone in order for it to happen. Remember, oppression, and specifically racial oppression, has really stripped us of everything.
Yes.
And the remnants of our cultures, the remnants of the knowledge systems that we once had are tiny, and we've really tried to put them alongside Western epistemological paradigms. So all of that needs to be broken down, but there isn't a moment where you sit down and you say, let's break it down. No. It is done through being it. Yes. So the decolonial project is about being that decoloniality, about constantly questioning, oh my God, why am I doing that? That is counter what is good for me as a Black woman. That is counter what is good for my community, because as Black people, we don't just think about individual, we think about family, we think about community.
I was speaking to an academic who says,
systemically, how that manifests within a space like a gallery, I'm just giving one example, is to make sure that my community of practice, my community in the gallery are not just workers. Make sure that they're part of a family that can co-create alongside with me.
So now let's talk about temporality and the disruption of linear history. And I know you've already spoken a little bit about this, but perhaps you want to look at your curatorial projects challenge linear notions of the past, present, and the future. How does disrupting chronological time enable alternative ways of understanding history, inheritance, and the futurity within post-colonial context?
So I think that in terms of thinking through something, through the life cycle of something, I guess that's the best way I can describe it. It's like, you know, we very much, what is available to us now is this context that we're in. What is not available to us immediately is a clear view of the past or the future, even more so the future. And I think that in the context of looking at something, right, in a museum space or in a gallery space, you're looking at something in its immediacy. It's there now. How can that thing evoke and contain the entirety of its history and also its potentiality for the future? So that is the curatorial challenge for me, is how do I position this object that's here right now in the present as a thing that has a life cycle or a lifespan beyond this moment?
That's profound.
Yeah, I just made it up. Sorry. But it's you. I think your questions are so apt that it really is. It's really kind of also making me think about stuff that I do in a very reflective way. So thank you. Your questions are great. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Doc. As both an academic and a practitioner, I know this one is very close to your heart. How do you navigate the ethical responsibility of teaching and exhibiting work that engages deeply within pain, memory, and unresolved historical violence?
Again, a
Unresolved
very
historical
important question.
violence.
So, yeah, go for it.
So I think about this question myself, but I'm not going to answer it because I'm not the academic here. But I watched a video of Professor Shilmbembe, wherein he talks about, I think that video is on viscerality, and he was talking the concept of viscerality in terms of how pain is experienced at a visceral level. So when I look at the tail end of this question about how do you navigate the ethical responsibility of teaching and exhibiting work that engages deeply with pain, memory, and unresolved historical violence, especially visceral violence?
I think, thinking about it, I've worked with a lot of complex projects. I've worked with issues of gender-based violence, violence in general, racial violence. They're very, 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 very heavy topics, right? And knowing that these are such heavy topics and potentially triggering, especially once you engage in dialogue with audiences and interlocutors, right? I think one has to approach people with utmost care. And what I mean by that, I mean, it's a cop-out saying that, but I think what I mean by that is that really being able to listen very deeply, right? Being able to use forms of disclosure. And speaking of one's personal experiences versus anybody else's experience, it really is an important way to navigate conversation or dialogue around difficult conversation. It's like, I can only speak about my own experience here. And if there's resonances, please speak up. Like, you're welcome to join in on the conversation. Or if you know of someone who has experienced something similar. And then with that, handling the response with a lot of care. And I've dealt with a lot of people who burst out into tears, and then having to really sit with people afterwards and allow them as an ethical practitioner to have access to me, the person who caused or triggered a certain emotional response. So that is what I mean by carefully, is that literally physically being present for people. I think when I did projects with kids or with women who I predominantly work with kind of kids and women within community projects, I've made sure that there's a trained counselor available
to deal with some of the dialogues that would be evoked.
Absolutely. I think that you have to be considerate when it comes to content that lay, like issues that lay very deeply hidden. And there might be something that just, kind of wakes that up, which is what really a trigger is. It's like it wakes something up in a visceral way. So memory doesn't sit here. Memory is in your entire body. And it might be something that you smell, wood of a certain type. It might be touching or looking at a certain textile. And then something that occurred in a room might come up for you. And when it's a visceral response, it's very hard to not have a physical response to something. So the aftercare is as important as the lead up to that. Like I said, with almost every single walkabout, there's been someone who I continue the conversation with afterwards. So if I book a walkabout, say of one of my own exhibitions for an hour, there's another 2 hours that follows and perhaps a phone call or a coffee afterwards. So it really is, you have to think through what the potential consequences of the work will be, because making art is powerful and it really can provoke quite intense responses.
And yourself, I want to ask this, you, the artist, how do you then, do I use the word debrief yourself from maybe putting up the exhibition, engaging with the various publics, and then on installing the installation? How do you then debrief yourself from all of that production, pre-production, installation, production, post-production? How do you manage all of that? Because after listening to various publics, could be youth, could be children, could be older parents, elderly pensioners, it could be students, it could be a tourist. Then you uninstall the installation. Then how do you deal with yourself, Dr. Nazia?
It's not the first time someone's asked me this. Like, people ask me this one all the time.
Yeah.
Like, how do you, especially with the exhibitions, like when I do a walkabout and I speak about what the work is about, people often ask me, like, how, how are you coping with knowing all of these things? I write a lot.
Okay, great.
I free write every day. And the people who I work with, it's very fortunate. I think I select them also, and I kind of, there's resonance, and I kind of gravitate towards them. The people who I've worked with, I'm very fortunate. We talk. It's in the relationships that I have with people and relating to them, we're able to talk about the type of work that we are doing together. I'm able to tell them that, I had this experience while installing something. I installed work. I'm just going to tell you a very brief short story about installing work at the Castle of Good Hope. I don't know if you know the space.
I know, in Cape Town.
It's in Cape
very
Town.
Well. Yes.
I had a show there for 3 years, like different iterations of an exhibition over a period of 3 years in the different venues. And that for me was very, 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 and I'm going to use the word triggering again because it was. Each of the spaces felt haunted. It was very, very kind of oppressive, the way that the structure and architecture of the spaces is created. I worked in the dungeons. I worked in torture chamber. I worked in the prisons within the castle. My colleague there, Calvin Gilfillan, is the director of the space, really lovely human. And whenever I had any sort of experience, like, it wasn't like it was intentional. It's just he was there. He was there to talk to. Because he had also such a deep investment in what the space meant. From a very critical perspective of how important the space was as like a structure that housed so much history, so much pain, so much violence for so many people. So his mission is also to kind of unearth that and really start to process it so that we can understand it better and be able to move past and through. And I think that's really my process as well. It's like as when I start understanding through the work that I'm doing, through creating in a physical way, it feels like I can now manage it. It feels like it's given me like, okay, so I get what this is now. what are the different ways for me to move forward with this?
Mm.
Until you understand what the issue is, what that deep scar is, what the deep kind of condition is that you're dealing with, how do you move forward? How do you move on from it, right? It doesn't give you an opportunity to make decisions about the thing if you don't even know what it is. So it's a very kind of liberatory psychology method that is superimposed with education as well as the arts. So it's a three-way kind of approach that I've used now for many, many years. And then my PhD was really kind of looking at how I can formulate this into an approach, a loose approach for others to be able to use it. Basically just bearing cognizance to the various layers of complexity that happens when you work with representation and arts, and when you work with very, very difficult content.
Okay, so we're starting to wrap up our conversation, but I still have maybe one or two questions. And I was going to ask you a question just about, because I still think about what you as a curator would experience when you've done an installation in a certain kind of a site. And do you sometimes, after an installation, experience some kind of supernatural experiences that tells you that you've awakened, perhaps because I watched a movie about transatlantic slave trade, and the director commented about how when she speaks to someone that actually lives on former plantations, like in Brazil, how they actually felt, they almost felt like they were interacting with the slaves that had passed on, etc. And people that go and visit like slave museums in Senegal and Ghana, etc., they talk as if they hear the cries of slaves, especially when they stare at maybe a sculpture or something, or some artifacts from that time. So I'm just thinking, when you do an installation in a space, the space and the installation, do some kind of energy of sort come to you, have some revelation to you, and that perhaps maybe even assist you in the way you explain the work, and maybe you see your work differently just by the fact that it is in that kind of space?
So I was telling you a story and then I got sidetracked just with the previous mention of the Castle of Kudo, because by far that was one of the most difficult spaces to be in.
Okay.
And I don't tell the story often, but it is an experience that I had while I was installing in the torture chamber. I was installing like a floor for the installation I was doing. As an art practitioner, because my art and curatorial practices, they go like this, back and forth, back and forth. Because I do installation art, and there's an element of curatorial practice there. So I was on my hands and knees on the floor, like patting some like carpet down. And I had literally the hairs on my body started standing
goosebumps,
up. And there was nothing that happened. There was nothing that happened to cause this from a physical perspective. No one came into the room. There was no cold wind. There was nothing. And when I got down and I was in this position, I felt like a cold shudder, and as if something else had been in this position before. Someone else had been in this position before, in that very spot. All I was doing was rushing to get the work done. So there was nothing going on in my mind that was imagining anything of the nature, etc. But the cold kind of hair-raising experience and this weird vision of being in this position because you're in pain, because you're being beaten, because you've been tortured, just happened. So for me, that was an important moment also, because it helped me to find a word to articulate the experience of work of this nature, right? especially if it's got to do with historical injustices and violence, especially if it has to do with embodied practices and psychological practices. You become like a conduit for the condition of society. And you become a conduit for people who's come before, right? And people who exist now, in trying to communicate in many ways what the experience is, to share that experience, to move towards a collective understanding of what that experience is. And then once that understanding is there, to really try to figure out a path moving forward. So the word conduit and the word transmitter is a very interesting one to me. It's like an aerial. It's like you take everything in, and this is why the care is so important. It's because your body and your mind and your whole existence becomes this this aerial that then takes information and you pass it. It passes through you in a particular way, and then you give it out for people to be able to see things differently. And yeah, I think that's really what I felt in that moment, is that in some way there was a channeling of an experience. I don't know if it was a supernatural experience, but
I don't
there
have
was
the
a
words for it.
channeling.
So you've dropped in the great word of channeling, because I'm just imagining that being in such spaces, especially within a space that has experienced difficult human history, somehow did that kind of experience happen? And of course, you've now confirmed that it did happen. Dr. Nasir, final questions. I can promise you no more questions after this. What is a central belief, thesis about what you do, your work, your teaching, and the exhibitions, curations, etc. that you do? What is your central belief and your thesis about the embodiment of your work?
How can we transform ourselves to really become the agential beings that we are supposed to be? I think really at the bottom of everything. I grew up in a country where people were stripped of their humanity, never mind agency. And I'm really very passionate about becoming, I guess, like a conduit, with, you know, and a tool for people to be able to enact that agency in the most meaningful way possible. So how can I become an agent for that to be able to happen? And my journey into history has really given me the grounding to understand who we are as a people right now. So I think the history is there for that understanding, but it really is about becoming, which is something in the future. And becoming isn't something that is stagnant or static.
Yeah.
Becoming is continuously becoming, working on being the best you that you can possibly be. And irrespective of the conditions you find yourself in, because I've seen people move from having absolutely nothing. And mindset is what changed things. So I've seen my own family do that. So if my family could do it, I think we all can do it. And it really is about mindset. Making something from nothing is about mindset. So I feel that really it's about, for me, about kind of enacting and kind of developing and becoming a facilitator of agency and critical thinking at the end of the day, towards really becoming the best version of ourselves. And even if I'm just like a tiny percentage of a whole bunch of people doing it, bring it. Like, I feel that the more the merrier. Like, we need to be able to share in the ways that we do things to get the project off the ground and to make the project move forward. The project of rehumanizing people of color post the colonial project. That's it.
Dr. Fred and Nazir, thank you.